Hello and welcome to the Franchise Territory Mapping Summit from MangoMap. My name is Lawrence, I'm the head of marketing here. And just to give you some background information about our company, Mango is the leading franchise sales and territory mapping platform, helping franchise brands all across the globe sell more franchise territories, normally within 90 days of deployment. Throughout the videos today, we'll be guiding you through how you can use territory mapping to define and present awesome territories to your prospects, explain what a great opportunity your business offers, and ultimately convince someone to buy in. I'm joined here today by Paul Gager, our resident mapping expert. In the previous video, we didn't really go into an in-depth introduction, so I think it would be great if you could just give everyone watching an introduction about what you do at Mango, Paul, and some of the clients you've worked with.
Yeah, thanks, Lawrence. So, many of you might have come across me already or seen me in various videos. So my role at MangoMap is really to help companies that have a franchise business understand what it means to define territories. What does a territory look like for them? They may not be doing territories yet, or they may be have started already but wanting to do things better. So really to guide people through the whole process of identifying what a great territory looks like, identifying the data that's required to define those territories in terms of demographics, age, income, and so forth, use the right boundary data to form those territories, and then to form the territories themselves. So whether that's something that we work with them on or they do themselves. But really it's that whole process to get them to that final point of having territories that are great, attractive, and ready to sell.
So I suppose you mentioned data within there, and we spoke in the last video about how territory mapping has become a much more data-driven practice, especially on the edge of, in the new ways that it is being deployed and that we work with all of our clients on, basically. So today's talk is about data, demographic data to be specific. I think this is quite a broad topic. So I think let's start by giving a definition of exactly what this means, because people might think, is it just population counts? Is it distances? It actually goes a lot more in depth about that. So maybe you could just start by explaining exactly what demographic data is and some of the specific metrics that we use when we're working with a franchise.
Sure. Yeah, so demographic data is really a descriptor of a resident population. So it normally comes from a household level survey, which might include, several hundred questions about the household characteristics that people live there. And it includes things like their age, their employment type, family structure, income, whether that's personal income, household income, ethnicity, language spoken at home, number of vehicles in the house. These surveys tend to be very, very broad, and there are very sort of a wide range of factors available. But the key ones are really age, income, count of households, and particular age bands. So, for example, people between age 0 and 4 or 5 to 9. So it's really that descriptor of the resident population that we're talking about when we say demographics.
So it's very in-depth about a resident population. You can actually get hyper-specific now. I suppose the next question is, where does this all come from and how do people access it? Because we use this data a lot with all the franchises we work with. What are the main sources and how do people find this?
So the main sources in most countries is the census. And depending on which country you're in, that might be a census that happens every 5 years or it might be every 10 years, as is the case in the US and the UK. Australia, it's 5 years. So this is a national survey. They aim to count every person in the country. So it's really a great resource, an in-depth resource that's available to people. Some countries, in the US in particular, there are surveys that happen between census years. So generally the data is pretty much up to date and covers that broad range of factors. And the data is disseminated by the National Statistics Office in that country or the Census Bureau, depending on where you are. And there are literally hundreds and hundreds of tables that are available to people. It can be quite overwhelming, but that's really the starting point, that dissemination post-census or post-survey. And that's where we sort of really come in and pick the data up.
I think when we've spoken to a lot of franchise brands before, uh, the idea that the real gold standard of data that is available is number one, it's open, which also means number two, that it's free.
Yeah.
I think people have this impression in their mind that if you want really valuable data sets, that they're proprietary or that you have to pay a lot of money for them. But actually, in this case, the real gold standard of data, if you really want to get specific about, when you're creating territories and you want to know exactly who lives there and the dynamics of the population, the gold standard is the census data that is given for free, made available for free to anyone to access at any time. I think that's a really important point that a lot of people tend to not realize when they're starting this journey.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's two really key things there. One is completeness, so it includes everybody, and the other one is currency, so that it's up to date. And yeah, the fact that it's free and open, it really is a great resource. The way that you use it is really just up to your imagination and working with people who have experience in this field. But there's really a wealth. It's almost like a gold mine of information, to extend your analogy there. That's waiting to be discovered and applied to these territory mapping situations.
Yeah, I think the main point about it is that you said it's a wealth of information. I think when people first, if they download a data set from the National Statistics Office, for example, there's so much of it. It's very difficult to know where to start. What data is most important, and I think you use this term a lot, is to not drown in data. This is a really important when you're starting off. We touched on it in the previous video. To start small, to really, and then branch out from there in a very iterative process. So I think maybe let's just touch on that point, because like you've spoken about this a lot. Don't drown in data.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the tendency is to go a little bit overboard with the demographic factors that you might include on a map. And in some senses, that's interesting, but it's also difficult to sort of action that. So I always say, start with the core factors. Start with total population count, income, household count, and maybe a couple of others. Just see how that looks, and just get the rough shape of that those parameters, and then add in additional things that you think are specifically useful to your business. So, for example, if you're targeting, let's say you have a fitness franchise that's targeting females between 19 and 44 in a particular age bracket, then you can add a count of that particular demographic. So it's sort of a building exercise, building up rather than just throwing the whole kitchen sink at the exercise. Otherwise, you just end up sort of chasing your tail and not really getting anywhere. Stay focused. Don't drown in data. You can always bring in additional factors, as you go along. But that'd be my recommendation there.
Yeah. It's a case in the beginning. I think we've discussed this. Is less is more, and you can always add complexity later.
Right.
But in order to get that foundation, it is about focusing specifically on factors that are relevant to your business.
Right.
So for a fitness franchise, that could be you're targeting a certain age group, or whether that's younger people, or you're targeting a slightly older demographic. Mm-hmm. Like you said, pet grooming, you might want to know, well, where are the people that walk the dogs or something. Or if you're a business one, you might want to get the local business count or the types of businesses. So it all really does depend on the type of franchise that you're offering, right. And your target market, I imagine. So we've got a point about aggregation here. So data is collected at the household level. Mm-hmm. I think there's a privacy concerns here as well. So it's not actually disseminated at the household level for privacy reasons. Maybe you could just explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so that's an important point to note. You're not sort of peering in through people's curtains, as it were, even though from a marketing perspective that might be quite useful. So generally the data is aggregated to an area. So that might be a statistical area with maybe 500 households in it. It might be a postcode, it might be a suburb or some other administrative unit. And so really the data from those individuals and those individual households is pulled together. So you'll get your total counts, you'll get an average of the incomes of those people who live in that area. And so that essentially forms the building blocks for the territory mapping exercise. So it's aggregated. It's important to note that. And it's really about, and we'll talk about this in another talk, what level of aggregation is appropriate for your particular business. Some areas are quite small, and so if you have smaller territories and you want sort of very carefully drawn boundaries, then you would choose one level of aggregation. If your territories are larger, maybe a few 100,000 people, for example, you'd sort of choose a different level of aggregation. That's really what the aggregation is about. It's that group of people who live in that particular area.
We've touched on the census. I mean, walk me through an example. Say if a franchise brand from Australia comes here, because we work with a lot of companies in Australia. We work with people in Singapore, UK, United States, Canada, all over the world. But we have a good customer base in Australia. Maybe just walk me through how it would look. We go into deeper detail about this in later videos, but walk me through what it would look like if an Australian franchise came to you and were like, we want to start off on this territory mapping process. Like, what would the steps that you would do? It would be going to the Census Bureau. What would it be? It would be great.
Well, I think that the starting point is always got to be, what does that individual customer look like? What is the ideal customer who's going to walk in to that gym or to that store looking to buy something? So what is their personal profile, as it were? And then basically to try and figure out how many people like that live in the area. And let's say you say, okay, there's 5,000 people that fit that profile in this area. We think we can win 5% of them as gym members, for example. So it starts off with the individual and then to the group level. And often if businesses are operating in particular areas already, they'll have a pretty good idea what an ideal customer looks like in terms of age, income, sex, employment, and so forth. So that's a great starting point. And then basically to build out from there. Then to think about things like how far are people willing to travel. This is where the geography component comes into it. For that particular service, are there other services in the area that might attract them away from your business? We'll talk more about this later, but certainly in terms of the demographics, start with the person and then build up from there.
Yeah. And also one point to add to that is that you said about distance, but there's also working populations that commute. But that's another variable that I imagine you would have to consider. And that's also available in the census, right?
Yeah, that's right. So, it's called the workday population. So that's a combination of the residents who either don't leave the area, maybe they're working locally or they're at home, plus the people who come in, for work, whether that's in a retail setting or an office setting. Many CBDs in most cities will have a very low resident nighttime population, but a very high daytime population. And so if people are looking to use the gym at lunchtime or it's a lunch bar concept, obviously knowing how many people are there in the daytime is very, very important. It's not always possible to profile them in detail because the information about them more generally is sort of left behind when they leave the house. From the census, that's where it belongs. But certainly you can count them, and that's for particular businesses that are in those areas. That's really, really important.
Talking of businesses, I think this is a really important point to finish on. Is that sometimes we work with companies or franchises that target businesses. So it could be anything from, there might be a business cleaning service, or they might be a courier. These type of companies, they service businesses.
Right.
So this is a different demographic. I suppose demographics come into it, but then you want to layer on business data on top of that. So that's an additional data source as well, and an extra complication. So maybe you could explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so generally in those B2B type applications, the resident population is not that important, or even the daytime population. So it's really about how many businesses in that area of a particular type, and what's the size of that business. How many employees. What's the turnover and payroll. So often that information comes from business registers. Most countries keep business registers, and again, the data is often aggregated, say to a zip code level. And then made available for people to use in market studies, territory mapping, and so forth. And so we work with a number of clients where that is really key information for them. So let's say, as you said, commercial cleaning. You want to know how many offices there are, and not just how many businesses, but what's the aggregate size, what's the market opportunity there to form that territory, and for somebody to have a viable business in that area.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's another great resource that comes out of government collected, largely free data. I'd say free in most countries. So if you're in that particular business, then that data is certainly available to support that kind of mapping.
It's like SIC codes or the NIICS. These are different. They're different in different countries.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a classification, North American industry classification that's used in the US and Canada. Australia and the UK have their own schemes. So it allows you to count, for example, how many businesses providing accounting services or food and beverage services, or it gets quite detailed. I think there are more than 50 categories at the sort of finer level of detail. There are bigger categories, groupings that can be worked with as well. So there's a good wealth of data available there to work with.
So in summary, I think that demographic data and adopting a more data-driven approach when you are territory mapping, the data is really a fundamental part of that. A lot of companies think that you might have to pay a lot of money for it. We've already addressed that point. But the real key here is knowing what to do with the data in order to build your territories. So in summary, I think maybe we could just touch on that a little bit more, that the real key here is there's a wealth of information out there now, and more gets added every 5, 10, or 1 years, depending on what survey it is, what country. It's a case of, number one, keeping up with that, but also the strategy. And we will touch upon this in later episodes and really do a deep dive on this. But I think we can just touch upon it just to prime people in terms of like a strategic look at this, just because I think that this demographic data part is a really fundamental, important part. And sometimes it's confusing and it looks really, really like just overwhelming. So I think just in a summary, maybe just touch upon that.
Yeah, sure. Look, there's many things that go into determining whether a business is going to be successful in an area. People's buying preferences, existing competition, and so forth, and all of those things can be looked at and addressed. But the key one is really to know, what's the market, what's the addressable market in this place, how many people are there, how many people that are my target customer who live there. If you don't have that, then really, you're just guessing. And if you're guessing, you're going to have trouble convincing other people that what you're offering has been well thought through, it's data-driven, it's clear in terms of where it's come from, how current it is. And I would say it's foundational to the whole process of determining business success. And certainly it's the critical thing in territory mapping that allows you to present territories to franchisees that are looking to invest.
And with a new company, for example, say it's a startup, because we work with startups, we work with very established companies as well.
Yeah.
I mean, there is an element of guesswork when you're beginning, right? Because you haven't sold loads of territories, you're still in that growth phase. I think that iterative approach that we touched upon earlier, or looking at similar brands,
Right.
or having a firm, at least an idea of who your target customer is.
Yeah.
These can all be created. You can make the territories, you can make some guesses, but then you can iterate from there depending on the feedback from the market whilst you're in that growth phase. This is what I think is a really important point in terms of that startup client, if any of them are watching right now.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when you're a startup, there are probably more unknowns than knowns. You probably have an idea about who you like to target, but maybe the ideas around territory size are less clear. So there's various things you can do to address that, to look at similar brands. They may be competitors. They may just be in a similar space. For example, if you're launching a health food supplement business, you might look at something related to that. So where are the successful stores in those places? Is there a demographic profile that's common to those? And there generally is. What's the spacing between those stores? Because the spacing will give you an idea about how far people are willing to travel, and hence how large the territory should be. So you can start to get a good idea of what some of those parameters around that are. And then you can just get started with the process. And you don't have to have all the answers, when you start. A lot of people sort of discover or their idea of what a territory looks like changes over time. So the mapping solution should be flexible and adaptable as the business grows and the business needs change, and the understanding of the owners of that business changes. The mapping solution should match that, and so that's really what I would say on that point. Yeah.
So we've covered demographic data in this talk. In the next talk, we're going to be discussing boundary data. Now, and then after that, we'll be putting it all together.
Right.
So we wanted to do this step by step, because if you've never experienced this, it might, like I said, it might seem a little bit overwhelming. Mm-hmm. So in the next talk, we're going to be talking about boundary data, which is you've got your data, you've got your ideal customer, you've defined exactly what you want in your areas. Then it's about determining, okay, well, how do you bound that into a territory you can package and deliver to an investor, a franchisee, a prospect, whatever. So that's what we're touching on in the next talk. Really great information there, Paul. Thanks for joining me, and we will see you in the next video.
Thank you, Lawrence. Great to speak with you.